Hello everyone, my name is Kate Yon. Today we are going to be discussing the importance of vocabulary and comprehension instruction. I hope this presentation finds you well and leaves you excited about helping your students become super readers and masters of vocabulary. According to Robert B. Cooter, co-author of Teaching Children to Read, vocabulary knowledge in reading is one of the great predictors of school success for English learners and English native speakers. You see, people can acquire new vocabulary from conversations, independent reading, and even the media. Surprisingly, comic books have more uncommon words than other types of children's literature. Now, before we can continue, I want to discuss some vocabulary that's important for you to understand as an educator as we go about this presentation. The first is domain. Domain can have two definitions. One would mean your content standard domain, but in this case, when we're discussing vocabulary instruction, we're referencing core subject area fields such as science and math. Those fields have different vocabulary words depending on the domain. Word consciousness is the act of creating and encouraging students who are aware of language and have an interest in words and their meanings and the relationships that are created with them. Classroom learning environment is an important factor in vocabulary instruction because studies show a smooth and organized classroom that has a warm and nurturing environment allows for deeper vocabulary instruction and retention by students. And the other four listed here are speaking vocabulary, listening vocabulary, reading vocabulary, and writing vocabulary. So these are the four types of vocabulary. Listening vocabulary is the largest of the words that we know, can hear, and understand. Speaking vocabulary is next, and it's the ones that we use regularly and can use appropriately. Reading vocabulary references those words that we can read, understand, and know the definition to. And then writing vocabulary is the smallest of our vocabularies, and those are the words that we know and can use appropriately in writing. Now, I think it's important to note that the amount of words in each of these types of vocabulary is dependent upon a student's life experiences, but also the level of richness that's provided to them in the classroom learning environment. And it's our job as educators to make sure that we're creating a vibrant vocabulary in our classroom that is going to carry students on to be successful in vocabulary and reading comprehension. So those are the four types of vocabulary, but we also have levels of vocabulary learning, and it's broken into 3 tiers. So we have our basic speaking vocabulary, which is tier 1. It's going to be your everyday language, usually 1-syllable words, dog, house, food, cat, the things that get students through the day in their conversations with each other and at home. Tier 2 is going to be more elaborate speaking. You're going to see explanatory words, adjective, adverbs. They're more high-frequency words used by adults. So students get exposure to this through conversations with adults. And tier 3 is the academic knowledge domain vocabulary. These are low-frequency words. They're very domain-specific, and sometimes they're reserved for specific situations. So words that students may use in a science class when writing a response to a research project are not necessarily the words that they're going to be using at home with their family members. So we have discussed the 4 types of vocabulary, the 3 levels of vocabulary learning, but what about how well students know vocabulary words? Well, that can be separated into 3 categories as well: the unknown, the acquainted, and the established. The unknown would be a student is completely unfamiliar with a word. That would be a new word. Acquainted with means that maybe they've heard it in a conversation or seen it in a book, but they've never made that connection with it. And established would be our goal. We want students to be very well established with the word, where they can speak it and read it and use it in writing as well. Now, this is a lot of information to take in, but as you take this knowledge back to your classroom to plan and prepare, I promise you it will make vocabulary instruction richer and more effective for your students. So what does research tell us about teaching vocabulary? Well, it says one of the most important things we can do is provide a high-quality classroom learning environment. This means we need to have organized routines with smooth transitions, use vocabulary and word knowledge throughout the day, and make sure that our classroom is warm and nurturing. We also need to emphasize developing word consciousness, allowing our students to really study words and make connections between words and synonyms and root words and affixes and suffixes to allow them to have that deep real-world connection to the words that we use. It's also important to accelerate word learning so we can fill in the gaps. Now, this does not mean that we should overwhelm our students, but it does mean that we can make sure to provide at least 10 new words a week per domain area so students can fill in the gaps, especially those kids that don't live in print-rich home environments. And the last thing we need to do to make sure that we have a strong teaching vocabulary in our classroom is to assess our students. And I know assessments can be scary sometimes, but if we do not screen them and use diagnostic measures and progress monitoring, then we don't know if we are effectively teaching them vocabulary, and that means we're doing them a great disservice. So I want to pause for just a minute and remind you that one of the most important things you can do with your students on a daily basis that will ultimately increase their vocabulary is to talk with them. Ask them questions about their life, their culture, their interests, and as you do this, you can infuse your conversation with important vocabulary language, and you'll get to know your students just a little bit better. All right, continuing on. We mentioned assessments, and one of the great diagnostic assessment tools that we have in our arsenal is word maps. They're a type of graphic organizer that can be catered to what you're teaching, and they ask 3 important questions. What is it? Meaning, what is the word? What is it like? And what are some examples? By asking students to answer these questions about specific words, you can assess where they are at. So this would be a great tool before you start a lesson. It could be a great tool at the beginning of the year, even after you come back from a break to see where students are at. And by doing this, you're activating prior knowledge, which is a really important pre-reading skill to comprehension. So here we have an example of a word map using the word petrify. So what is it? We have the definition there because I know what petrify means, but your students may put something different. I have what is it like? So in this case, some synonyms for it: scare, frighten, afraid, or terrify. And what are some examples? In this case, I put a book and having a rattlesnake in my house, or for some people, they may be petrified when they see a clown. So it's also an opportunity for students to have fun with words, which creates that word consciousness that we want so we can have vocabulary masters in our classrooms. So once we've assessed our students, it's really important that we use evidence-based teaching practices to help increase vocabulary knowledge. There are 4 principles to consider. 1, direct and incidental. Vocabulary instruction should be taught both directly and incidentally. We need to explicitly plan for vocabulary words with great intention throughout the week, but also allow for incidental learning. We also need to teach our students that vocabulary words can change depending on the context they are being used. 3, we need to provide depth and breadth of word knowledge and elaborate on word meanings to help students have a full understanding of the English language. And 4, we just need to use the words a lot and give them multiple meaningful exposures throughout the week and then in the weeks to come after they learn the new words. So as you're planning your vocabulary instruction, I want you to consider using the Freyer model. The Freyer model is not only effective in our instruction, but it's very effective for teachers as they're planning out their instruction. This model is a simple and effective tool that can be used in a vocabulary instruction that is built upon routine. It can be altered to include pictures for students who are in lower vocabulary grades, but it allows them to really interact with words, understand its definition, characteristics, examples, and non-examples, all of which is really important to having word consciousness and increasing students' vocabulary to where they have established vocabulary meaning. Let's shift our focus to reading comprehension. We've established the importance of vocabulary instruction, and that really does lead to deeper comprehension for students. So if you see here, we have 4 types of questions that can be asked of students that leads to higher reading comprehension. Number 1 and 2, right there, think and search. They can be grouped together into a subcategory of things that can be found in the book or in the text. Numbers 3 and 4, author and me and on my own, are things that have to be done in their head, sometimes quietly, and they require lots of pondering. Now, I need to note that these questions cannot be answered accurately by a student if they have not first been modeled by the teacher. This can be done in whole group and small group instruction with the help of aides, but the important thing is they need to see you asking questions, finding the answers, asking questions, and thinking out loud. The ultimate goal is to get kids to question what they're reading. Questioning can lead to a deeper and richer understanding. All right, we're putting all this information to use in our classrooms, but we still might have some students who need help. Here's some recommendations. Number 1, you need to find out where your students are struggling and meet them where they're at. Lift them up, encourage them, provide them with scaffolding and lots of modeling so they can rise to the occasion. Number 2 falls in line with this. We have to model. Teachers have to model the thinking out loud practice. I promise you it will lead to better comprehension. And number 3, you need to capitalize on the interests of your students. And how are you going to find out their interests? By talking to them daily, by reading a large variety of texts. All of these things are going to lead to making sure you don't have students who get stuck in reading comprehension. And you know what? If they do, you are now equipped to make sure that you can help them. Thank you. And remember, reading and literacy is the great equalizer.